3-year-old girl points at police dog in courtroom, says 2 words, "What happened?" The courthouse was silent, save for the distant hum of city life leaking through its stone walls. Reporters sat poised, pens hovering above notepads, cameras blinking red like vigilant eyes. In the center of it all sat a child, barely 3 years old, with blonde curls framing her round, solemn face. Her feet didn't touch the floor. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit in one hand, her knuckles pale from the grip. No one dared breathe too loud. And then, she pointed. Her tiny finger trembling as it stretched forward toward a black and tan police dog sitting obediently by his handler near the witness stand. 2 words, soft but clear, left her lips, "He helped." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was a scene few would ever forget. But to understand the weight of that moment, we must rewind, to the night that shattered and saved a life all at once. 3 months earlier, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Indiana, the world of little Emily Carter changed forever. Her home, a modest white house with daffodils blooming along the walkway, was the site of a late-night break-in. Emily had been asleep in her room, hugging the same rabbit she now held in court. Her mother, Sarah, had tucked her in, read her 2 bedtime stories, and kissed her forehead like she always did. What followed next was chaos. A man, desperate and armed, had forced his way in, intending to rob the place. But when Sarah confronted him, protecting her daughter, he turned violent. Sarah was injured, critically. The only witness to the assault was Emily. When the police arrived, Sarah was barely conscious. Emily, hidden in her toy chest, taught by her mother to do so if something ever felt wrong, was found by a K-9 unit led by Officer Daniels and his German Shepherd, Max. The dog had sniffed out her faint scent and barked sharply, alerting the officers. Emily emerged, shaking, wordless, clinging to Max's neck like a lifeline. From that moment, an invisible bond was formed. Emily didn't speak for weeks after the incident. Trauma, the doctor said. She hadn't cried. She hadn't played. She just held that rabbit and stayed silent. Therapists tried gently, but Emily remained locked in her silence, her little eyes hollow, distant. That is, until Max visited. At Officer Daniel's suggestion, Max was brought to the hospital room one quiet afternoon. As the door opened and the large dog padded in, Emily's eyes lit up for the first time. She sat upright. Reached out. Max nuzzled her hand, and she whispered something no one heard. From that day on, Max became a regular part of her recovery. He'd lie beside her bed as she colored or hold steady as she walked the hospital halls. Slowly, the silence cracked. She said her first word in weeks, Max, then came others. Laughter returned. The brightness in her eyes flickered back to life. Meanwhile, the investigation proceeded. The man who had hurt Sarah and terrified Emily was caught and charged. But the case hinged on one challenge: Emily was the only witness. The defense pushed for dismissal, claiming the child couldn't be trusted to testify. Sarah, though still healing, knew the truth had to be told. But how could they ask a toddler to bear that weight? The judge, a stern but fair woman named Judge Thompson, allowed a special request. Emily could enter the courtroom, with Max. So, on the day of the trial, cameras gathered outside the courthouse. People whispered about the bravery of a 3-year-old girl and the dog who had saved her. Inside, Sarah sat in the front row, a bandage still wrapping her arm, her eyes fixed on her daughter. Emily walked in slowly, holding Officer Daniel's hand, Max walking beside her, calm and proud. The judge leaned down, smiling gently. "Hello, Emily," she said softly. Emily gave a small nod. The lawyer asked the question simply, with the patience of someone handling something precious. "Emily, do you remember what happened that night?" She nodded again but said nothing. Her hand tightened around her rabbit. Silence hung heavy. Then, in a moment no one expected, Emily let go of the rabbit. She turned her head. looked at Max. Her eyes welled up as she lifted her hand, pointed at him, and with a tiny, trembling voice, said, "He helped." That was it. 2 words. But in those words lived an entire truth. A child's memory. A cry for justice. A bond unbreakable. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Grown men wiped their eyes. The judge looked away for a moment, then called for a recess. Reporters would later write about the testimony of the silent heart. The man was convicted. But the story didn't end there. Months passed, and Emily continued to heal. Max was nearing retirement age. After years of loyal service, he'd earned his rest. Officer Daniels knew the dog deserved a home filled with love, peace, and family. So he asked the one person he knew would understand. Emily's mother burst into tears when the officer showed up on their doorstep with Max and a simple offer, "Would you like to keep him?" Emily squealed with joy. It was the first time Sarah had seen her daughter run. The story made national headlines. Police dog given to little girl he rescued. It sparked conversations about the role of animals in trauma recovery. Donations poured in to support K-9 units and children's therapy programs. But more than that, it gave people hope. Because here was a child who had every reason to be afraid of the world. Yet she stood in front of a courtroom full of strangers and pointed toward the one who gave her strength. Here was a dog trained to serve, who went beyond duty and into the heart of a child's healing. Here was a community reminded that even in the darkest of nights, light can find a way in. Sometimes, in the form of a bark. Sometimes, in the whisper of 2 small words. Years later, when Emily turned 10, she gave a speech at a school assembly. The theme was heroes. She stood at the podium, Max now older and gray beside her, still dignified. "My hero," she said, voice steady, never wore a cape. "He had 4 legs, a tail, and the kindest eyes you've ever seen. When I was scared, he was brave. When I was quiet, he listened. And when I couldn't find the words, he helped me speak." The audience gave a standing ovation. We live in a world that often feels loud with pain, fast with judgment, and short on kindness. But then we hear a story like Emily and Max's, and something softens. We remember the power of presence. The value of gentleness. The strength of a bond that doesn't need many words to be understood. And maybe, just maybe, we realize that no act of compassion is ever too small. Because sometimes, 2 words can echo loud enough to change a life. He helped. And because of that, a little girl found her voice. A hero found his home. And the rest of us found a reason to believe again.